let's have some tough love around what those companies are looking for, who you really are, and how to merge those forward. I think that the second point, though, that I think is very important for everyone that's listening to understand is that we're at a moment where almost all of us need to change our craft. And product managers, more than any others, are facing that, where the way we work needs to be upgraded. As we noted, you get paid for your intuition, and your intuition is getting dated. Now, in order for you to upgrade that intuition, it is almost certainly not the biggest job you can get next. It is a learner job. It's essentially going back into an educational mode. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Skip podcast. I'm joined again with Carly. She and I are going to talk through today's episode. It's one, I have to admit, I probably spent a month just thinking through how to best address so many questions that came in. So last episode, she and I talked about, how is 2025 affecting people's careers and what's the weather like and how different that is this year versus in past years. At the end, we announced a new AI powered by our friends at SuperMe. They and I worked out a way for people to go to nikhyl.ai, nikhyl.ai. And when people went, they were able to ask career questions. I was not only able to see them, but my AI, which was trained with some of the content from this podcast, the Substack, and other sources, essentially did its best to sort of help people through, everything from interview prep to career transition advice to compensation questions, et cetera. So after I reviewed the first 100 of these, it became clear that there was just a ton of anxiety from our listeners around how AI is affecting careers, particularly for product managers. And so what I felt that we needed to do was take a step back and build a bit of a framework to help address some of these questions. Something that's a little bit more than just a high level, everyone needs to work harder, everyone needs to become a builder, everyone needs to go hands-on. I felt like that advice only carried so much weight and it was very hard to make tangible. And so today's episode, we're going to go through a bunch of these caller questions. Caller in this example are people that submitted questions via the AI. And then she and I are going to work through a framework that can help sort of dissect how you should think through AI and career transitions in this era. So welcome, Carly. I hope you're doing well and turn it over to you.
Amazing. Okay, thank you. Good to see you again. As you said, so we received a lot of questions, especially from our last episode. And so what we did, like you said, is we took probably like the core ones where if you distill it down to patterns, like this is what people are generally feeling. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to read off a few of these questions that we've collected with almost the hope and even expectation that one or even more will resonate with someone listening, right? And so I'll read them out and then we'll start dissecting them. And like you said, going through the framework that you've developed. Let's start. So one person, I'm a director at a FANG company and recruiters keep reaching out about senior IC roles. These used to feel like a step backwards, but now they're positioning them as better opportunities. What's changed in the market that makes IC roles suddenly more attractive than management? Okay. The next one is I'm in middle management, right? So I'm setting a vision, a strategy, all of that, but for my team, not for the company. I'm not directly working with the new age of product management, and it's a weird time right now to be a middle manager. So how do I stay relevant when I'm neither strategic nor hands-on? Okay, so that one's very much maybe a little more specific for that middle manager who they're kind of put in the middle of, two different situations, maybe like an IC that's very hands-on versus more of a director. All right, another one. After 2 failed startups where equity went to zero, I need something now more stable. But every, quote, safe opportunity feels like I'm giving up on being part of the big AI transformation that is clearly happening. How do you balance financial security with staying relevant? The next one. I'm supporting aging parents and have 2 kids approaching college. I can't afford to take equity-heavy packages anymore. But those seem to be the only roles where real learning happens. Am I priced out of innovation? So this one's a really good one and we'll talk about this of like different constraints that people have, whether it's compensation, where they have to work. So things like that. A few more. I'm a PM at a growth tech company with a great team and supportive manager, but my work feels tangential to the core revenue drivers and completely disconnected from AI. Another growth tech company reached out about a senior PM role with better pay, but I'm worried that neither option will actually help me build the skills I need for where tech is heading. Should I stay at a great company doing marginal work or chase title and compensation elsewhere? Okay, I feel like that's a very relevant one that a lot of people have. Okay, the next one. I'm leaving big tech and torn between two offers. The first is a late-stage fintech startup with a broad product innovation mandate but no direct AI component. The second is a tiny early-stage startup building AI agents. My head says take the stable fintech role, but my gut says I'll regret not being in AI. How do I choose between career safety and being a part of the AI transformation? Okay, I think that's like probably one of the key ones here is literally choosing, do I move with technology and where tech is going, or do I take the more safe option? So that's a great one. Okay, we've got two more for you. I'm a VP of product growth at a pre-IPO company making great money, but I've become pigeonholed as a growth person. I have an opportunity to join a Series A AI infrastructure company as head of product. I know it's risky, but I feel like even if it fails, I'll be better positioned for the future. Is it crazy to leave stability this late in my career to chase the AI wave? All right, and the last one we have is how do I position myself for AI-focused roles when I don't have direct AI experience? I've been managing teams for the last 5 years, and while I understand AI conceptually, I haven't actually built with LLMs or shipped AI features. Do I need to become technical, or is there still room for pure product leaders? Okay, that one also is very much someone who's probably gotten comfortable at a tech company. They haven't really dipped their toes in AI. They know it's happening, but it's almost like how do they position themselves best for a company that is AI first? That's almost like the skills identity crisis, if you will. All right, Nikhil, so I just read a bunch for you. And I think one thing I even just want to start off with, right, is a lot of this is all product related. And so I want to know, do you think this is it a PM thing? Is everyone having these issues across different roles, or how should I think about that?
My takeaway, and part of the reason I think you and I talked about sharing some of these, and by the way, this is just a drop in the bucket. I mean, you and I both know that we pulled, 6 to 8 of these out of, a pool of 100, and we'll have more that we'll share here in a second. I think that it's really representative of the sort of general concern that product managers specifically are facing as they think about the function changing so radically. I think more than any other function, the goal of product management is to sort of use your product intuition to craft products within a large scale environment. So if it's a company that's managing product market fit, you have to use your skills to navigate that product market fit. If the company has a product that's working, you need to use it to scale the organization. But in the era of AI, people's intuition now needs to change. And so if I'd spent 15 years becoming an expert in how products get built, and now all of a sudden in the next 2 years, the way those products get built couldn't be more different, then if you get paid for your intuition and your intuition is obsolete, you're pretty nervous. And you're nervous because either you're going to be in a company that's building things like yesterday, in which case the company's not going to be great, or the company's going to be great and you're going to be obsolete. And so now these questions all point to like, hey, I feel like I need to upgrade my intuition, but it's not entirely clear, especially as I've been doing this for a while. How do you go back and retrofit? How does that impact your lifestyle? How does that impact your skill development? How does that impact some of your career choices? How does that impact your compensation? All of these things are happening. I think to answer your question, product folks are kind of on the tip of the spear here because they're seeing a lot more impact because the skills they bring to the table needs to change so radically. And, as fast as new models are being shipped, as fast as new tools are coming into the enterprise, they have to sort of keep on top of that. And, lots of people are not in a position to do that. That's where I think a lot of the concerns rest.
Also, I'm curious, as you were speaking, in my mind, like as an engineer, it's so obvious if you have those gaps in your skills, right? And so in a way, the forcing function is probably so much stronger to go on the AI train and be able to be a skilled AI engineer. Whereas I think, do you agree or disagree? Like, is it easier to hide maybe as a PM and almost kind of fake it till you make it to be able to work most effectively with an AI company, or not so much? Like maybe that's why this is like almost a little bit of a gray area, but you're starting to see it more.
It's an intuitive question. I think that it's very trend friendly for an engineer to embrace AI because, it helps them code, it helps them have better impact. I think with product managers, one of the major changes that's happening is not just the fact that AI is building products differently, but AI is also building organizations differently. And so now what ends up happening is 3 product managers are doing the job of 7 in the past. And younger companies bring product management in far later. The challenge that you then face is it's a lot less fun to be now doing a lot more work for the same role that one had. And so your point is it's a lot more fun to be an engineer who can have test cases written by a product as opposed to themselves. But it's a lot less fun if you are spending a lot more time traveling to customers because you have an expectation that instead of managing the process, you need to have more customer intuition. Or you need to be a lot more in the detail. And so instead of asking engineers to review that with you, you have to sort of go directly into the code. So the role itself is a lot scarier because it's a lot more hands-on. It's a lot more customer facing. Clearly, these companies run at a higher pace. So I think the anxiety comes from people that are sort of feeling like they're halfway in the intersection. And they're like, I'm pretty sure I'm not doing the thing that I need to be doing, but I don't think I am forced into it. And if I was to force myself into it, it ain't so fun. So that's where you're sort of stuck in the middle.
Got it. Got it. And even from the questions that I read out, it's so easy to assume, like, is every company these days an AI company? Like, is that how we should be thinking about AI? Is it just completely taken over?
I mean, I would say no. I think every company wants to be an AI company, which is different from are they AI first. I did a panel conversation recently where I brought in some recruiters and leaders who were very much focused on hiring head of products. And they bifurcated the industry into sort of 2 buckets. They sort of said, look, there's these young, hot AI companies, many of which you haven't heard of. And, frankly, a lot of them sound like Star Wars characters. They kind of crack me up. But they're these like young, growing, on these sort of insane clips. And a lot of those companies have built their org structures, have built their products with sort of AI kind of first. And what's interesting is when they go and pull product management into their organizations, they actually don't want their product managers to be experts in AI, which is somewhat unintuitive. You would expect that they would be like, look, we're an AI company. You have to kind of know that world more than anyone else. But it turns out that they're like, look, we got plenty of experts in this business, in this organization that know AI. And in fact, AI is not that old. So there's not that many OG, AI folks that are out there. What they want is experts in scaling who can also be hands-on. Now, the other side of the coin are the vast majority of businesses that are actually doing well, but need to now embrace AI, that they're nervous about disruption by the upstart that's going to, take their business and do the same thing, but in a lot more efficient way. That organization actually looks for their product folks to be sort of the AI torchbearers. And so it's funny because there couldn't be more of a distinction between if you can bring AI into an organization, a non-AI organization for obvious reasons is going to embrace you. And those businesses can be pretty healthy, but it really distorts what it means to be a product leader now. Because in one case, you have to be very good at being hands-on and very good at kind of continuing to scale what is considered to be a very new organizational structure and a very new way of building product. And then the second case is you have to be an agent of change. You have to be someone who can understand AI and change the way we build product, the way we embrace AI and what is real, and actually turn that into a product strategy when the founders may not have that ability. And so those are pretty different places, but they both are leadership. And so I would say that not everyone's an AI company, but everyone wants to be an AI company.
Okay, so let's go back to the framework, right? The framework that you have developed based off of these questions, or at least that can help us start to digest how to think about this. So tell me a little bit about what this framework is. What is the big picture? And then we could start diving into each element.
Yeah, I mean, I think I take probably somewhere between 5 to 8 calls a week that start out a lot like what you read out. I'm having this anxiety, a classic example is you read out, like, I'm a middle manager. I feel like my company's not being AI first. I feel like I'm going to be obsolete, as we've talked about. And, when I put this episode together with you, I started to figure out, like, it'd be great if all of the listeners could have a basic set of tools to be able to sort of break that question down into its meaningful parts. So what I end up doing when someone approaches me is I essentially go through this mental chart and checklist. And the chart that I have in my head is on one side, a set of opportunities. Opportunities could be like big tech, or it could be, healthy public or near public company, or it could be founder, or it could be Series C turnaround, something along those lines. Now, those are sort of doors that a person could walk through. What is helpful, I think, to people is to not start saying like, oh, do you know someone at Stripe? You should talk to them. It's really to figure out which of those doors apply to the individual situation. And to do that, I essentially look at what their constraints are and what their skills are, which to some extent sounds fairly obvious, but, believe me, most people don't go through such a detailed way of thinking. And so if you have a set of constraints, for example, around compensation, certain opportunities, certain doors are just going to be locked to you, and others are going to be relatively open. But then again, if you are not skilled or don't enjoy certain things, that is going to filter things down. So almost every person I talk to, just to be very candid with you, start out with a basic framework of what's the biggest job at the best company I can get. And they start to say, hey, I want to get a huge brand name. I want to get as much money as possible. I want to get as much scope. And almost always through the discussion, and hopefully through this episode and then the subsequent part 2 of this podcast episode, you'll all be in a position to say, no, no, no. On these 7 doors that we could go and try the doorknobs on, 2 actually are the right ones to actually consider. And neither of them are theoretically the biggest job at the best company, because the individual in this case is either constrained or unskilled at getting that role, or it's not something that would be the best and most career additive move. So I know that sounds a little abstract and we'll get into the details, but my hope is that we kind of triangulate in this conversation, focusing on those constraints, focusing on the skills that people need to have, and then ultimately mapping them to those opportunities. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. So I want to go through a specific example because I think that'll make it even more clear. But you actually answered what I wanted to ask, which is almost how do most people approach it, right? And you said they want the big brand name, they want the flashy name. Why do you think is it important to almost think of this quite programmatically and say, you should think about constraints and capabilities rather than the big brand name? Is it because people have unrealistic expectations and it's almost like a waste of time necessarily to go and try for this where you're not setting yourself up best? Or do people just get so lost in the noise because of social media and, they just raise this fund? Like, why should we kind of go away from the big brand element, or at least decision framework, if you will, that people are currently doing?
Yeah, I fully understand your question. I think that there's 2 parts, and I think you alluded to one. It's not that people are necessarily delusional, but I do think that they don't think that they have to factor in their own skills and capabilities into the job framework. I think that maybe this fits into this very specific narrative, which is companies aren't schools. And so lots and lots of the reader questions that came in were like, hey, should I go to this AI hot company because it'll teach me how to be a great AI person? And my observation is, frankly, in this market, most of those people that are asking that questions aren't qualified to get jobs there. So it's somewhat of an academic question. So that's the people set their sights out to say, oh, well, anyone can get an AI company, but are you willing to deal with the pace, the location? Are you willing to be hands-on? But the answer might be like, yeah, sure, I'm willing to do that. And it's like, well, realistically, there's also an aptitude question. And so part of the conversation is, look, let's have some tough love around what those companies are looking for, who you really are, and how to merge those forward. I think that the second point, though, that I think is very important for everyone that's listening to understand is that we're at a moment where almost all of us need to change our craft. And product managers, more than any others, are facing that, where the way we work needs to be upgraded. As we noted, you get paid for your intuition, and your intuition is getting dated. Now, in order for you to upgrade that intuition, it is almost certainly not the biggest job you can get next. It is a learner job. It's essentially going back into an educational mode. So the question is, how do you upgrade your skills when in reality you need to be qualified for the role that you have? The company needs to be doing something in a way that you can learn, but you can contribute to. It's not just a one-way door. You're not paying for school. It's essentially a partnership that you have to have where you come out with a much stronger story and a much more modern way of delivering product. So that is effectively going to change the calculus. Because if the calculus is, well, I'm not qualified for everything that's out there, but I definitely need something that's going to improve my skills, how the hell do I do that? And how different is that from what's the biggest job in the best company at the largest role I can get, right? So this is the big contrast. The reason why I kind of came to this conclusion is so many people talk to me and they come out of the discussion with a different framework. And I think what I'm realizing is you have to systematically go through these constraints and the skills and what the market's looking for in order for you to ultimately say, yes, I wouldn't make the same decision as I would have made 2 years ago when I need to practice product management differently after this next job.
Okay, that's super interesting. I also really love how you put it in terms of like companies aren't schools. Like you're not trying to get this job to learn. And I think a lot of people naturally are optimizing for that, especially with this AI wave. That's how they're thinking through how to gain these skills. But you're kind of pushing back on that and saying, you know what, like you actually have to consider you have constraints that you probably haven't even thought about, right? And then 2 is you actually have to add value to that company. It is this partnership. And that's probably the highest chance of you even getting that role as well, is so you can show that value.
That's right. And maybe another point I would just make on this is that I'm coming across probably slightly more negatively than I intend. What I'm noting is that it's like, look, folks want to get big jobs, but they need to really recraft their skills. So they need to sort of set their sights lower. Interestingly, there's just as many people I talk to who perhaps are a little earlier in career or perhaps are able to take risk because their family situation allows it, their income situation allows it, and they have also applied a career framework that's antiquated. And their antiquated framework might be that, well, I'm making so much money at, say, big tech, or I have a really steady job. I'm really nervous about entering the market when it's so wonky. And I'm sort of like, look, you actually aren't going to do as well in your current job or style of position as you would if you were to make a move. The changes in the industry actually are tailwinds to you. You are very well suited to take advantage of the market we're in. You are hands-on, you like smaller teams, you are very opinionated on product, yet you are sort of stuck with this sort of older framework, which is biggest job, best company, when in reality, the quote-unquote upgrade of your intuition is actually your intuition as it exists today, but it's been held back by your career decisions. So sometimes when I talk to folks, they feel like they can take a lot more risks than they were originally thinking. Other times people say, I should probably go back to sort of a school-like, really retool myself. And others I talk to, just to be very blunt, I'm like, hey, you're not in a position to easily upgrade your skills. You should harvest as long as you can your situation or really go back and think about your skills and constraints because they're the things that you really need to work on, not just trying to find some new exciting job that sort of grass is greener on the next hill because it'll backfire. So that's kind of the discussion we need to have with folks today.
I think, Nikhil, if I can just like distill it down, what it comes down to is that what you are presenting is almost just more data for someone's personal decision framework. of how to think about what's next. And what you've seen is it's so natural to lean into the big brand, the big name, the noise. And so people, more often than not, like you also just get kind of disillusioned by it all because you see this opportunity maybe presented to you or not. But what you're saying is that there's a world in which that's not even the ideal opportunity for you, given your constraints, given your skills, given what you're optimizing for. So now you're kind of opening our minds into like, what are these other buckets that we should consider in order to kind of deal with this anxiety that we're having about navigating our careers. Okay, so let's talk first through compensation, because that's a very common one that has come up multiple times in your calls with people, in the questions to Nikhil AI. I'm going to actually read through, I would say, 3 to 4 scenarios in which compensation is a big topic. All right, I'm 37 with no significant savings because I kept joining early stage companies. Everyone talks about, quote, investing in learning, but I need to now invest in my 401k. Are there any opportunities that offer both learning and real compensation? The next one is, I have offers from both Stripe and Databricks. While neither is public, their secondary markets are active and equity feels almost as good as liquid. Is this the sweet spot? Upside potential, but with some liquidity? And then the last one that we've collected is, I'm 28 and have time to take equity risks. I'd rather swing for the fences now than play it safe. Should I be specifically looking for pre-Series A companies where my equity percentage could be meaningful? Okay, so Nikhil, what are your thoughts, or how do you kind of zoom out from all of those?
Yeah, I mean, in this area, I think it's just really important for all of you that are thinking through transitions or even just longer tenure in your current company to just have a realistic sense of compensation. I think compensation, not surprisingly, came up a ton in our AI, questions. I think mid-career folks in particular are in a position where they need to see some liquidity. And, I think we've covered at least half a dozen times in different podcast episodes that the big shift that we've seen more in the last few years is there are kind of 2 mega trends. One mega trend is big tech has done extremely well. As that stock in sort of the larger tech, the top sort of 7, 8 companies, as those stock prices have continued to do extremely well and double, if you were making $1 million and you have all of these stacking grants, your $1 million might look closer to $1.5 or $2 million. And yet it's not that your market rate's gone up. It just means that your annual earnings has gone up. So for you to sit down and say, look, I'm going to go from a $2 million salary to a $1 million at a new company because that is my market rate, you would essentially have to work twice as long to make the same amount of money. And so that's a huge factor in people making transitions right now. And I don't want to look past that. I think it's a really hard thing to just give up. At the same time, the core tension, as we've described, is that those jobs are not necessarily upgrading their intuition. So you're caught between bird in hand versus two in the bush, right? If I invest in my career, it will help. If I just harvest this role, I might become obsolete. So that's one mega trend. I think the second trend is a lot of people who had joined growth companies that are just not growing. And leaders in particular received half their income in equity that they may not be able to hold on to or that may never end up becoming liquid. And I made this note early this summer, and I'm seeing this trend where a lot of those folks are now proactively leaving because they recognize that they're being paid half their market rate. And when you're being paid half your market rate and your company is not AI first, you're sort of looking at it and say, let me get this straight. I'm making less money and I'm not becoming relevant in the future. So there's been a lot of people who have seen compensation as the straw that broke the camel's back. If those companies were upgrading their skills along the way, I think they would have more holding and staying power. But I think that the combination of these two is creating some anxiety. Now, there's this third bucket, and you mentioned the sort of Stripe, Databricks, range. There's this third group of companies which are, really doing well. These are companies that are either recent public or they're near public, like the OpenAIs or the Ripplings or the Stripes. And those companies not only have liquidity because everybody wants their stocks, so they're able to sell some stocks, so you don't have to wait until a company goes public before you end up getting some affordance. And even if you were to leave, you can hold on to the stock through the RSU instrument. or even sell it because there is secondary traffic. So those companies are now suddenly top targets for those that are compensation concerned. So if you, for example, are head of product at a company that's struggling, you're not feeling like you're learning AI, you immediately go to some of these healthier organizations where the business is stronger and they're actually in a position to make some investments, go after some of the higher, more expensive AI staffing and go after AI, initiatives. It's kind of a no-brainer. And then I would say that the other angles of compensation are very consistent with the past. Founders and founder equity, those are all challenging. Clearly, you can raise more money these days, but the teams don't have to be as large, so that money can go to higher salaries. So perhaps there's some small changes where people are able to afford being a founder more effectively than in the past. But for the vast majority of folks, the big trends are these healthy growth companies that have liquidity, big tech, which overpays and very hard to leave, and the sort of mid-stage ex-growth companies that are really struggling. I think those factors are the major ones. And obviously, founders also have exits with talent acquisitions when that was sort of, maybe the last 4 or 5 years, relatively rare. You see more and more small acquisitions happening by companies like OpenAI and others. So there are opportunities to really pick that up. And if you're lucky enough to be an AI researcher, obviously the market's very, very frothy for that group. So there's a couple of edge cases, but for the most part, these are the bigger trends.
I want to ask specifically about the one I read. It relates to a little bit about what you said before of and there is this kind of distinction that you've drawn between learning versus value add. And so the one person that I read was almost a 37-year-old, kept joining early stage companies, didn't really turn out to be any successful exit. In your mind, are there opportunities that offer both learning and real compensation? So the excitement of the startup, but you're also getting that real comp?
Yeah, I think that you can, for example, be AI adjacent at larger tech companies. I mean, if you think about it, Google, Microsoft, Meta, they have market-leading products in AI. And every one of their initiatives are being AI leaning. So if this individual who's 37 years old is like, look, I've turned down a number of later stage opportunities because I wanted to sort of take on a larger leadership role at a growth setting, and I keep doing that, and I feel like that isn't paying, then I think they can go upstream. They can go to Stripe, they can go to Meta, and they can actually be a little bit closer to the AI world, but they can definitely get better comp. And that comes up a lot. I mean, hell, that came up yesterday in a conversation I had with someone who was essentially had been a head of product 3 times in a row, and each of those had mediocre exits. And they were frustrated, but their framework and what they were planning on doing was stick to the same lane, stick to the same door. They were like, look, I got another opportunity. This company is slightly further along. They're leveraging all my skills. I'm getting better and better at this head of product thing. And my note was that that's like the one door you should not go in, because you have not been paid for a number of years, as this individual said, and there's a great opportunity to change the calculus. But they're not necessarily the hot AI company. In this example, sure, you could take an OpenAI or Anthropic and you can maybe get both because those companies have liquidity and those companies also are very AI-centric. But the hot Series B AI startup, is going to be overfunded and it's going to be super competitive. And you might end up 2 years later having nothing to show for your equity. It's possible. But you don't have to just go to the earliest of stage to be able to get some of this AI stuff. It's just a little bit more adjacent than the smaller, hotter startup.
Makes sense. Okay, let's move on to the next constraint. So I feel like things have actually shifted away from remote everywhere that we've obviously seen, especially during COVID, or at least spun up by COVID. I'm going to read 2 situations that relate to this that we've gotten from Nickel AI. So 1, I'm a product leader in Austin, and every AI role seems to require SF or New York City. I've built my whole life here. Kids in school, spouse with a local job. Our remote senior role's basically dead. Do I have to choose between my family stability and my career relevance? Okay, so I feel like that's a very common sentiment. The next one, though, is I've been at Google for about 5 years, currently leading a technical team. I'm progressing well and the work is important, but I'm questioning my long-term path. I'm also based outside the typical tech hubs. Should I stay at Google where it's stable but potentially limiting, or take the risk? Okay, so I read 2 that essentially the common thing is they're remote. The big anxiety, if you will, is do they have to move or uproot their lives, or how should they be thinking about it in order to stay relevant? How do you think about it?
This one's a big one. The calculus of location probably has changed more than any other factor. And I like to put this on the table because I think it's a lot more impactful to decisioning than people give credit to. So, history lesson, up until COVID, I think more and more companies were starting to experiment with some remote teams, and then there were some fully remote companies, but it was very much a renegade kind of thing. The vast majority of companies were 5 days a week in their office, and people would just move to their location and manage the commute. COVID hit, companies embraced remote only, hybrid, all that good stuff. Today, we've kind of swung the pendulum, I would say 2/3 of the way back, not all the way back. So, if we had just sort of erased COVID and we look at where the market is now, there's a large number of companies where the management team is not in the same location, where many, many employees are mostly remote or remote almost all the way through the month, and they gather on a rare occasion. However, we are starting to see hybrid or fully in person as the sort of starting point. So this one matters a ton. I think that if you are in an AI first young, hot startup, it is very rare. In fact, I'm not aware of any pure remote company where they don't gather on a weekly basis at all that is AI first. And I think that there's a connection between the speed and pace of working and being at least somewhat together in office. So, for example, I think OpenAI is hybrid, where they require people to be mostly in the Bay Area and mostly 2 or 3 days a week. I think many of the hot AI startups, those companies are often 5-day-a-week type settings. And I understand how that impacts people, but you have to realize when you're all in person together, you work differently than if some people are in person and some people in your team aren't, and you're not on video. I mean, it does change the dynamic. And for people that are early in career, in person is huge accelerant. So as much as we may poo-poo companies that are like, oh, they're very tough on their employees by forcing people in the office, frankly, they're actually delivering on a higher quality experience for some of their products. And so I understand why companies go this route. Big tech also is starting to push back in a very confusing and extremely complex way, where some teams are fully remote, some teams are hybrid. Occasionally you'll see teams that are in person. Some big tech companies are even talking about 6 days a week. So there's all kinds of craziness. There's a very long way of saying that if you want to be in a hot AI company, you almost have to assume in-person's required in some fashion, and almost all of it is in Bay Area today. That won't always be the case, but Bay Area / in-person is a requirement. If you are in big tech, increasingly not working close to an office will become harder and harder year in and year out. And if you are essentially in a remote location, remote meaning not in a big tech city, Seattle, New York, San Francisco, maybe Austin is sort of an edge case. But I think if you look at those cities, if you aren't in one of those cities, then your choices of where you can work are dramatically smaller than they certainly were during COVID, but significantly larger than where they were pre-COVID. So there are companies like Hims and Hers is one of the companies that is doing a nice transformation of their product line. They're fully remote. There's at least 100 of those examples. It's just not as many choices as maybe you would wish.
Okay, I have a quick question. Say it's someone probably more likely early in the career who this actually isn't a constraint at all, and they're willing to move wherever the job is. Do you think they should be optimizing and almost putting up higher in their list to be in person? So if someone's able to move and to be in person, should they be thinking of that maybe 1, 2 second on their list?
I think that's an absolute no-brainer. I think that if you're early in career, half of maybe even 2/3 of learning is to understand how people work. And if you're trying to understand how people work and you're doing that through video calls that are scheduled, you're going to really struggle with observation because you don't observe people except when they're in these sort of formal, video settings. So what I would say is if you're starting career, The more in person, the better. Frankly, almost everyone I talk to that are early in career have said that. They want that. It is not always easy to find a 5-day-a-week situation, but hybrid, I think, is a completely valid and frankly very mainstream thing. Should you move to the Bay Area, I would say there are certainly a lot of hot companies in the Bay Area and a lot of AI-first companies in the Bay Area, but not everyone that's early in career is going to get jobs there. I'm not necessarily telling you that you have to come in the Bay Area because it's easy to find an in-person job. I'm just saying that if you're qualified to get lots and lots of roles, you're going to thrive in those AI-first companies that are in person. It's going to actually connect a lot more to your ability, and your constraints can actually work in your favor. And so when I talk to people that are in there, I'm like, look, you're in the Bay Area, you're wanting to go in person. You should not be working for this purely remote company that's headquartered outside when there are 100 hot companies that you're qualified to get. And that's an example where we move people from one door to another because it'll be much more career additive in their first or second job.
I love that. Nicole, we should do another episode that is purely about that, which is like, what should you be optimizing for, right? And what's like the fluff that we tend to optimize for, but we shouldn't. By the way, I've also heard a bunch of podcasts that talk about exactly that, which is like being in person. You never even know how much you're learning, but a lot of it is like even sitting by your manager, you're hearing how they take calls, and then you're adopting that. And that's ultimately leading, setting you up to how to, be a leader and act in that way.
I mean, it makes sense, right? You can see this in sports all the time. There are players who are unlocked because the vet shows up to the team. And the veteran that comes in is, not perhaps at their peak form, but they're wise and they've been down the road. And so they show you how to train. They show you how to prepare. They tell you which parts of your skills you need to exploit versus which ones you want to improve or hide. Those are things that a wise, seasoned individual can help with. Sometimes they are in a position where they teach, but often you just want to watch. There are so many examples where I was surrounded with people that were at the top of their game, and I watched. How did they prepare? How did they motivate? What does executive presence look like? And then I started to emulate and experiment, but I would never have done that had I not been surrounded by those individuals. And it wasn't just working at the same company. It was literally in a meeting with them and watching them perform and being a fly on the wall. I think it's hugely important in career additive to be able to observe in some setting. I mean, that everyone needs to go 5 days a week? No, and I understand life exists, but hybrid and early in career in person, I think, are the 2 points we're pushing.
I think the same, even from my last job. Being in person was the most amazing part of it. Okay, let's go into the next constraint. So there's a lot of talk about 996, especially for AI companies. So first of all, that means 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., 6 days a week. I'm going to read also some questions and quotes we got about relating to burnout and boundaries and how do we balance work-life, all of that. So the first one, I want to transition to AI, but every role seems to require 60 to 70 hour weeks. At 42, I value my health. I value my family time. Are there any AI opportunities with work-life balance? The next one is I've been grinding for 10 years straight through multiple startups. Part of me wants to coast at a big company for a while. Is that career suicide? And then the last one we have is I'm in my mid-30s, 3 to 5 plus years of really putting my head down and grinding. My fiance is a founder. We don't have kids. I'm ready. I want to be on every steep part of the learning curve. So talk to me about how you advise people when they mention burnout, work-life balance. How should they be thinking about this?
I get a little bit grumpy about this one because I feel like we're in an era in the past 6 months in particular where there's almost like a performative aspect of pace, that somehow everyone is trying to outpace each other as a connection towards success. Hey, we work, 996, we work 12, 12, everyone's got the verbiage that is designed to scare and impress. And I think most of it is horseshit. I honestly think that there are 3 buckets that I think have existed forever that still exist today. And I think before we start talking about the scary parts of AI companies and this and that, I think we should just kind of level set on some terminology. I think that the one type of company expects work to be the top priority of their employees. One type of company expects their employees to be online after hours. And then one type of company expects their employees to have their nights and weekends. Okay. These are the three, let's call it red, yellow, green in terms of work-life balance, let's call it. But these are the three relationships that employees are expected to have with their work. So if the work is a top priority, we now are kind of calling that 996. It's essentially saying that, we expect work to be more important than any other aspect of one's life. And that means that meetings are happening on weekends. I was talking to this group that were guiding me around how do AI startups actually function. And they said that, hey, you know what, we're recruiting head of products for these companies, and almost all their interviews are on Sundays because these folks work pretty much 6 days a week and Sundays are the only time. If you really want to make work your top priority, that makes complete sense. And I have been in that mode before, and then I've been out of that mode before, and I understand it. And that company typically has young or first-time founders, and that I don't signal that as being naive. I signal that as they're married to their work. They often don't have kids, and so they don't have the same boundaries. The work is their P0. I think that this has existed forever. So when I was founding companies, that was a way others were working as well. It is a little unusual to come into work on Saturday in a structured way. Like everyone in the organization shows up on Saturday. Everyone is expected to be there until 8 p.m. at night. That is a little bit different. But, I understand that these AI companies are going at this pace. So that to me is work as a top priority. I think that that is rare, but it is common amongst the hot AI startups that are, in this sort of emerging category. The OpenAIs of the world don't operate like this. They operate in the second bucket. They are online after hours. This is the bucket that nobody seems to talk about, but is the common for most of the Bay Area companies and the hot tech startup. This is also where most big tech jobs go. And that is, you go into work, you work the day, you go home, you spend time with your family, you go back online, you clear your inbox, you write the spec, you work through a set of details, you go to bed, you wake up the next morning, you work through the week this way. Weekends come and you're triaging, spending time online, etc. How many hours that turns out? It ain't no 40-hour job. It's basically working all the time, but inserting boundaries. And essentially, most companies understand that, hey, we're not going to do standing meetings at 9:00 at night because we recognize that not everyone can be there. But if we send you a note, we expect that you'll respond in the next 12 hours or the next 24 hours. And this is the vast majority of organizations that are out there, and many of them have kids and parents. And so when a lot of people come to me and they're like, look, I work this way and I'm super scared around the market because I feel like the pace has gone up. I'm like, look, you work all the time. Like there is many, many, many jobs that are going to look just like you work now. This is the very common thing at Meta. I certainly saw more pace at Meta than I did at Google. But at Meta, and certainly when we were at Google Plus, there was like a tremendous amount of pace. I mean, these were not these cushy places. Now, are there people that work at these big tech companies who are much more in this sort of avoid nights, avoid weekends, and get their boundaries? Absolutely. Because, there's hundreds of thousands of people that work there. But for most of these hot areas, they are very much working constantly. Yeah. It's just that they're able to accommodate boundaries. And then obviously the third bucket is those that are sort of avoiding nights and weekends that essentially work, in a very fixed and structured way. And it's not just themselves, it's that their coworkers do that. So if your coworkers sign off and no one goes back online until the next morning, then it's sort of an anomaly for you to push because there's like, if you send a Slack message, nobody's going to read it until the end of the day. So then you start adapting to their schedule. So there's these three norms that exist. What I'm nervous around is people that have worked in that third norm, meaning that they sort of never bring home their laptop. They're pretty much used to working in a structured way. They are not going to be very compatible with these other two modes. But oftentimes they send notes like the ones you read, which is like, look, I don't understand. My nights and weekends are mine, but now I'm becoming less relevant because of this AI thing. I think it's bogus that I have to go and work on these crazy schedules. And so my note is like, well, look, there's not that many jobs that are going to be growth jobs, both in terms of company and in terms of skill, that are going to maintain those boundaries. So you got a choice. And the choice is you should stay in your lane and not worry about trying to find these growth opportunities because you're not able to do that given your boundaries. Power to you. I have respect for your boundaries. I'm not telling you not. But I don't think you need to go 996 in order for you to upgrade your skills or to be a lot more relevant or be part of growth. That middle ground is a real middle ground. But I do think that these three buckets are important. And I think the second bucket is the norm. The first bucket of 996 and then this sort of no nights and weekends seem to be the exceptions. And that's been mostly the case for a long time. So that's the reason why I want to be careful about the language here.
Let me ask you this. What does someone need to compromise if they decide not to do the 996? The first one I read, I've been grinding for 10 years straight through multiple startups. Part of me just wants to coast at a big company for a while. Is that career suicide? So are you saying that at the end of the day, if you choose not to do 996, you are ultimately giving up what?
Let's first look at the question that was asked. The question that was asked said that, hey, should I just coast or should I upgrade my career? I guarantee you the person that asked that question is not a big tech. And I guarantee you, if we brought in 50 people from big tech, not a single one of them would theoretically say that they're coasting. Because almost everyone that I see that works at big tech works in this always online mode. I've worked in big tech for 9 years. I am telling you, every team that I've been associated with pushed very, very hard. So this concept that big tech is a avoid night and weekend does exist for some individuals, and those are largely tenured and those are tucked away. But if you're new and trying to break into those companies, those roles are not available. There's no role that's like, why don't you make a big tech salary and not work very much and have a safe, cushy job? If you're in a position to get that, go get that. Fantastic. You won't be able to upgrade your skills, but man, you should harvest this as long as you want. People that get that have been at those companies for a long time, and they're very much the anomaly, especially these days. So my first note, just to sort of correct the record, is big tech is not a lifestyle job. Those folks work hard. Those folks work under a lot of stress, and their employers know they're making more than market, so they put a lot of pressure on them. That's point one. Now, to your question, you make a great question, which is like, hey, if I'm not able to work at 996, what do I give up? I'm like, I think you're giving up working at the hottest of AI startups that are founded, that are really early, and they may not be the best environment for you anyway. But if you are willing to work online after hours and put priority P1 as opposed to P0 for work, most good jobs are available to you. The Stripes, the Ripplings, the OpenAI, most of the Metas, you name it, most of those companies work in that fashion. But I understand that these AI hot startups are very, very rare opportunities, and they're worth going to if you can make that sort of commit. But that is a level of commit of coming in on Saturday every day that is unusual right now. And then I think that's what you're giving up. I just think that because they make that and they're the poster child for this AI movement, everyone's getting scared that every AI opportunity looks like that, which in reality is not the case.
Got it. Okay. That is super, super interesting. So you even laid out a few things there, right? One is you're just debunking the assumption that there ever really is work-life balance, likely for the listeners of this podcast, right? Which is even if you're in big tech, at the end of the day, you probably are mentally always on and you should be always available and answering emails and questions and whatnot. And the other thing though, too, is like that one question, the person's 42, values health and family time. Are there any AI opportunities with work-life balance? We're basically saying that, yes, there are opportunities that are the hottest AI startups that probably are 996, but there are actually other AI companies that are just as exciting in different ways right? That you would almost optimize for in different ways that give you maybe another definition of work-life balance, right? Where you're on all the time. Maybe you're not going in on Saturday, but you're almost highlighting the definition of work-life balance should be kind of, revisited, if you will, because everyone, it differs.
Yeah, I think that if you need to upgrade your skills, you need to make work a priority. It doesn't have to be P0, but it definitely needs to be P1, or you need to recognize you're not in a position to do that and not then spend all your time getting ranty about these AI companies that are pushing pace. Like, you can't have it both ways. But I think that if you are not in a position, you should harvest the role that you have that does allow boundaries, because it's increasingly more and more of an anomaly where people don't have to bring home their laptop and they can get a good work done and the company's doing well. It just doesn't exist as much as it used to be.
Got it. I'm glad we kind of laid that out. Okay, Nikhil, let's transition now. So we did constraints, just as a reminder, right? We are figuring out what doors are open for you. What doors should you walk through when you're thinking about your career and what's next? So we handled constraints. Now the next bucket is almost your skills. What abilities do you have that enable you to walk through that door and best position you to get that opportunity? Okay, because like you said, not everyone is actually able to do everything just based off of the skills you have. So I'm going to read up some few questions and then we'll dive in. All right. I've been managing teams for the last 5 years. OpenAI rejected me after the first interview. They said they wanted someone, quote, closer to the product. What does that even mean when I've been shipping products for years? Okay. The next one. For the right company and environment, I have absolutely no ego around taking an IC role. I've had a VP of product title before, but I would absolutely work for the right VP of product if all of the other factors make sense. At times, I was leading a team of one, just me as the product person with designers and engineers, and those were some of the most energizing, highest paced, and most productive times. All right, the next one is, I've been trying to get more hands-on by taking online courses and building side projects, but companies still see me as a process person. How long does it take to rebuild your reputation as a builder? That one I love, by the way, because it's almost like, how do you learn new skills without joining a company? What can you do on the side to best position yourself? All right, and the last one is, how do you know if you're actually a builder or just someone who manages builders? I genuinely can't tell anymore after 10 years in big tech. Okay, that one's great. So now that we've transitioned to this bucket of skills, can you give us a high level? Do you mean stuff like communication, technical, management skills? How should we think about it?
Yeah, I think that, a long time ago, a lot of folks would talk about how do you teach someone to be a founder? And ultimately, a lot of the conclusion was you can't. People are either wired to be entrepreneurs or they're not. It has to do with their sort of mindset and how they think about risk and the kind of grit and energy and hustle and how they think about setbacks and all that good stuff. I want to signal that the same thing kind of exists for builders. And I think that the skill that's most important for everyone listening on this call to figure out is, are they just sort of wired to be a builder from the get-go? If you are the type of person who loves being in the details, who loves to play with products, who always has an opinion. I mean, I know I'm a builder because pretty much every piece of software frustrates me, because every time I use it, I'm like, well, I wouldn't have built it this way. Or clearly this thing hasn't been thought about. That's the type of person who is absolutely enthralled and curious with all the advancements of AI. Every time they wake up, they think, oh my gosh, they're building things a little differently. They've improved this one thing. Oh, hey, browsers are changing and all of these staples are getting better. This person that's always sort of in the product and cares about product and has an opinion on product is genetically a builder. Now, that doesn't mean that they work as a builder in their occupation today. It just means that their mindset is they love the product. The way I describe it is, if we were working at, say, a Tesla, they're the ones that love the detail on the car itself. Now, there's another person who works at Tesla who loves building the factory of the cars, right? So the person that loves the factory probably isn't as concerned around the actual detail of the car, but they're very interested in how to make many cars, how to make those cars efficient, how to make those cars cost effective. Okay. That person is also a prized individual, but you cannot convince the factory worker to redesign the dashboard because that isn't their interest and skill as much as it is for them to think through how to build another factory in another location or how to put a new car through the factory line. So these are totally different skills. Now, what's happened is with AI, the builder, the crafter has become a lot more important. And it's not just for consumer products. It's in enterprise products, it's the person that knows the customer better than anyone that can actually explain what the customer's doing and connect it more with the product at a level that otherwise couldn't be done because they don't have the same amount of time being spent in managing, the actual building of the product, because that's actually been handled more with AI. So what I would say is builders are in favor, but not everyone has the mindset to be builders. And that's the core thing I want to make sure that we land is you need to determine, are you a builder? Are you more of a manager? Or are you something in between?
I really like that distinction, by the way, because even in my mind, I was like, a builder is the one building it, like the engineer, right? But it's almost that mentality. Like even a designer, I could think of being a builder if they're obsessed with how the users are engaging and what that looks like for the product. So I think that's awesome.
I love this word you just used around obsession. Let's hold on to that word because I think you can use it to sort of diagnose what are your obsessions. For me, it's like I'm obsessed with the detail of the product. I want that product to be great. Some are obsessed with the efficiency of the factory and the scale of it, but many are not obsessed with either. This is the big question. If you're neither, a class isn't going to necessarily create an obsession. It will create knowledge of one of these two lanes. But my fear is today everyone's like, look, we need to all get good at building. Let me go and learn about building. Or let me join a company which will teach me about building, but their obsessions aren't there and they will fall flat.
I would even argue now it's probably easier than ever to almost self-categorize yourself as a builder or not, because we have all of these tools at our fingertips that are enabling us to actually build products and to, start something without, the technical skills necessarily. And so you're actually able to see like where are you obsessed with and how are you kind of using these new AI tools and all of that. So it's pretty exciting in that regard.
Your point is so on target because when I spend time with folks that are asking questions like the ones you've read, I turn around and ask them, hey, so how are you spending your spare time? Your point is if you are a builder, you have the ability now, you don't have to go and complete a huge engineering project or some computer science degree in order to get off of the first base here. You could essentially start building on your own. So when people come to me and they say, look, I'm thinking about a hands-on role or an IC position, and I know that's the next thing for my career and all this other stuff. And I'm like, well, have you spent any time building things? What are you building on the side? What are you hacking? What's your opinion on these tools? And they're like, oh, I don't have time for that yet. I need to make time. I'm like, look, you're seeing it academically as something to learn, but it's not a pure obsession, which means you're probably more like a builder wannabe. That doesn't mean you're screwed. But it means that if you aren't naturally attracted to building, it is a major headwind in becoming AI capable. And that to me is an important distinction that those that naturally like building things on their own or at their company are really well positioned and they should be taking risk and they should be more hands-on. If you're naturally not attached to that, you probably want to be an expert in the management side if you're a senior, or you need to start recognizing that being a builder, having an opinion is the future state of you, and you need to go find that out and start getting more into the detail on product. Because if you're a product manager and you're neither product or a manager, you're in trouble. That's the point I'm trying to make, is either you have to obsess about the product, obsess about scaling that product, the car or the factory. But more than ever, if you don't have obsession about either of those, it's going to be very, very tough for you to just academically take a few classes and all of a sudden be the person that a hot company is going to be excited about hiring.
Okay, so you just outlined that one, it's possible actually to be neither, right? And then you have to kind of consider and take those steps. But I want to ask you this, can people be both? Can you be both the builder and the manager? And can you move between them effortlessly? How does that look like?
Yeah, I think you can be skilled. I mean, there are some people that are just very, very skilled. and they are both able to be opinionated on product and be thoughtful around scaling. And yet, oftentimes, one is their favorite state. So I think that it's not the case that you have to pick a lane, but you have to have at least one of those lanes. We've seen lots of examples, especially as companies ended up crunching the number of middle managers. A huge percentage of managers were forced into becoming individual contributors. And most of those folks did not work out because their natural state was to think about org and scale and throughput, and they just weren't able to sort of find their way into that mode. I honestly think that usually you're one or the other, and many of the people that are really good at crafting and detail, they become so important to the company that they get responsibility to become managers. And often they're an okay manager and a great individual, and then they have to deal with that tension. And today, those people are finding themselves into small teams. But I generally think that builders are very clear in their mind. They're builders, and they stay as builders in mindset, even if they end up in management roles.
I can think of a likely scenario, right? Which is someone is naturally a builder. They're obsessed with the product. Their instincts are builder instincts, right? But then as the company grows, they maybe grow with the company and they start to become a manager. They're almost like forced into that role. Are you then telling them, go back to those builder instincts? Like find a job where you're able to go maybe earlier at an earlier company, a smaller size, where you're back to that early stage? Or how do you kind of navigate that?
I think most of those folks who feel like their intuition needs to be upgraded do end up being successful at moving to a hotter company who is building things in the future direction, and they do it in a hands-on position. So I had a panel recently, and I had two people, one that moved from a head of product to Meta, one that moved from a head of product to Sierra. And in both cases, they were leaders. They both concluded that this AI thing requires them to upgrade their intuition. They ended up getting very hot roles, but the way they thought about it is, let me first upgrade my intuition by being hands-on with the customer and the product. But both of them are now moving into leadership positions, to your point. So they took the sort of proverbial one step backward, upgraded their intuition to go two steps forward. That can be done because they were always a builder in mindset. They never ended up sort of becoming purely hands-off in their way of building. And that's the clue where they can do that. But others are sort of coming to me with questions and saying, hey, I'd love to be in a position to become an IC. And maybe that's the right career step. I'm like, yeah, but can you succeed as an IC? And the answer is often if they are a builder.
Okay, let's do a little recap because we covered a lot. We covered a lot of information here, starting with even just the general gist, right? Which is that people are feeling very commonly this anxiety about how to navigate with the new AI wave. Maybe it's not even new anymore. So let's do a recap, and then we could set us up for the next episode of part 2 as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think when we scripted this baby out and I sort of thought through the information, I kind of came to the conclusion that, look, the first part, we need to lay the groundwork on those constraints. We need to lay the groundwork on mindset and skills. We need to make sure everyone realizes they're not alone. A lot of people are asking questions. The next episode I think we'll do is we'll go through each of these different doors. You know, hey, big tech, what do you have to believe? But we'll have now all this information behind us that we can use to sort of very quickly start building the framework of which paths make sense for which people. So to summarize this part of the episode, and then we'll go to the next part next month, is I think that the big thing for product managers right now is their intuition needs to be upgraded because products are changing in a way that they haven't before, which is the one step backward to two step forward. Companies fall into two buckets. They either are doing great, but they need an AI strategy, and they expect their product managers to not only scale the org, but to provide that AI strategy, almost to turn around their company to be AI first. But then there's the hot AI companies who actually look for product managers to actually bring the scale in and actually not be AI experts because they have those resident, and instead be experts at working in this much more efficient org structure, but also scaling at the same time and providing some of that adult supervision. I think that the three big factors that you have to consider when looking at any product opportunity is your compensation, your location, and your pace constraints and abilities. And I think you should do that without shame and recognize that that will definitively change the calculus of which opportunities are available to you. I think that you also need to understand your skills and mindset associated with being either a builder, a manager, or something in between. And if you are a great builder or a great manager, there is a huge career path forward. But if you are in between, a class isn't going to make you into a builder. You need to have the obsession to basically be one of the two. And that, I think, is the last and final point, is that builders are in favor today. And so I want each and every one of you to really think through, if you aren't obsessed around product and have this profession, we need to be very thoughtful around either how to achieve that or find some other path forward.
Your term, upgrade your intuition, I think is so clear in a way. And I think that's so relevant. And then I think the biggest thing for listeners right now to take away is, like you said, take a look in the mirror, right? And now almost you have this ability to add this framework saying, like, what are your constraints, whether it's compensation, whether it's working remotely, whether it's the pace that you want to work at, whether you want your weekends or you don't want your weekends, or you're just okay being online all the time, whatever that may be. And then your skills. And, taking a good look at what your skills are and almost getting a sense of, do you see yourself as a builder or do you see yourself more as a manager? And so this is like an excellent way to set up the grounding for us to say, like, okay, next time, now we're actually going to go deep into the doors that you outlined, and it'll be clear of which door makes most sense for you based off of your skills and constraints.
Yeah, and as a teaser for this next episode, I do want to signal that I think that if you're not a builder and you're not a manager, the one advantage of product management right now is it's getting closer to marketing, getting closer to sales, and it's frankly getting closer to engineering. And so there is an opportunity for you to, as opposed to being the front line of constructing the product, you might actually use this to pivot more towards embracing some of those other areas and to being the hybrid sales PM, hybrid marketing PM, or even hybrid eng PM. So there is a teaser here around career paths if you're not this obsessed product person when it comes to the scale of the company or the actual product it's building. But I think that's a better question to be asking yourself than which classes can I take to learn Claude Code, because I think that you have to have the mindset that that's something that you want to obsess over. So Carly, as always, great seeing you. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you. And keep writing to Nickel.ai, because clearly that's where we're getting it from, and it's excellent.
Yeah, I've enjoyed responding to those individually and collectively here in this episode. So we'll see you next time.